Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with Executive Director for the nonprofit Yoga Studies Institute, Bob Cirino. His mission of teaching the classic texts and methods of yoga has reached thousands of students in over 35 countries and 8 languages. He has studied Tibetan yoga lineages for 8 years and directs a nonprofit that teaches one of the most fundamental Hatha Tibetan lineages. Though he celebrates yoga in the West, his emphasis is on the embodiment of the essential aspects of the practice that are most often left out or just plain never taught. He's a deep professional with a lot of great stories. Enjoy.
Well, hey, Bob, it's great to meet you, man. I'm really looking forward to getting into your life. You got a lot going on with yoga and everything that you're doing to help people. And I want to begin our conversation with 4 years ago. You know, this pandemic really threw things kind of into a tailspin. And I'm curious, how did you survive that time period, and how did it affect the way that you do business now here in 2024?
Wow. How did I survive that time period? Well, I think that adaptation is important. And I was, previous to working at the nonprofit, I was doing real estate acquisitions. And so that came to a screeching halt. Nobody wanted to go anywhere. So I was faced with the opportunity to kind of reinvent myself and really go in on my core beliefs. And so that was, how did I survive? I think that the way I survived was really saying, what do I really believe I could do that's going to serve people most in this moment, regardless of whether it's, you know, a big business proposition or not. You know, because I've done startups, I've launched businesses, I've done real estate developments, but my heart was really like, how do we help people? Because, you know, I think this is the beginning of kind of a different era. That's what it felt like. So I said, I think the thing that people need more than anything right now is compassion. So how have I learned how most effectively to give compassion and help others to cultivate compassion was through the practice of yoga and meditation. So I adapted in totally shifting my career path. I'd never done anything nonprofit. I'd done all for-profit. And I said, you know, I think it's time to do this now. So how did that change my business? Well, pretty dramatically. I joined a nonprofit that was founded a long time ago, kind of fell asleep, woke back up, called the Yoga Studies Institute. So woke back up in the pandemic of people who wanted to really get into understanding yoga, especially the philosophy of yoga, not only just the physical practices of yoga, but the philosophy. So I went from doing things very much in person, you know, face to face, to being part of an organization that I'm now the executive director of, and we serve thousands and thousands of people in 8 languages, over 35 countries, teaching them the classic literature and methods of yoga. So pretty dramatic shift in adaptation, I'd say.
Yeah, that is a dramatic shift. And I'm curious, if you were to be put in front of a bunch of third graders right now and you had to explain to them exactly what you do for a living on a daily basis, and one of the kids was like, hey, what do you do? How would you answer that child?
Well, third grader, I think a lot of third graders have learned the word yoga. But I would say if I was put in front of them right now, I'd say I teach kindness. That's what I do. I teach kindness and compassion.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
In third grade, let's see, I had picked up a guitar. I was pretty interested in music, so musician might have been up there. But I also had a microscope at that time. My parents gave me a microscope at a young age, and I started investigating the natural world microscopically. I thought it was unbelievable. There was a whole other world right in front of us that we couldn't perceive unless we had something like a microscope. So I think I would have said a scientist in third grade.
You know, I think that's interesting you say that. It's almost a buried subconscious memory for me, because I always felt that way when I was younger, too. I love the telescope idea, but I also just absolutely thought that the microscope was the coolest thing. Even looking at, like, an eyebrow underneath there was just like, wow, one hair follicle was like a universe. Yeah. It was crazy, you know?
Absolutely. I remember the first thing that blew my mind wasn't an eyebrow, though those are pretty wild to look at. It was actually a butterfly wing. Because you think of a butterfly wing as, I don't know, one thing. But then you put it under a microscope and you notice that it's this collection of these tiny, 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 like discs almost. And you see it as one general picture, but you get into the microscopic level and it's almost like it's individual pixels that have different colors that in concert create something really spectacular. And I said, wow, like, this is a whole nother world.
You know, I'm always thinking, because I'm a visual artist myself, I'm always thinking about, like, ideas of kind of how to come up with things. And I think you may have just made me think about either going to Amazon or going into a thrift store and see if I can hustle one down to get a butterfly wing. I think that would be totally fascinating to see that. So, yeah. So I'm curious, you had mentioned real estate and now you're helping people through yoga. I'm curious, take me back to where you were born and raised, and what were these seeds that were planted into you to get into real estate and to eventually get into your current path of being in yoga and helping people be kind? How did all of these kind of get harvested in you to become who you are today?
Oh, that's a great question, Joe. Thank you. You know, because I've wondered the same thing. I've led a very, very, very unconventional life, from doing fintech startups to literally being a farmer in the Dominican Republic, putting together a farmers cooperative to real estate acquisitions to teaching yoga in a nonprofit, and then launching my own education business, teaching yoga and meditation applications to everyday life. And I think that when I try to find the through point, like what's the thread that connects all of this journey, and it's really been a journey into understanding compassion and trying to figure out what it means to live compassionately through my instrument, like the instrument of Bob Cirino. Like, what does that look like? And then being unafraid to say, well, not that, and then go to something else that feels like it's more supportive of that idea. But, I grew up in a very health conscious family. My mom's a physical therapist. My dad's an engineer. And my mom was into Tai Chi, and my dad's a martial artist. So they were into, kind of value-driven Eastern, I guess, practices. And then it came through into health consciousness through what we ate. We were the weird kids at school when everyone was eating white bread, or we were eating Ezekiel bread, which is like sprouted grains. And so we were always a little alternative. And there was this one area that we moved to where there was a beautiful meadow near my house, and I used to love to go and explore, and there were foxes, and it was really cool. But then it got totally bulldozed, and a development went up, and I grew up in one of the fastest developing areas on the East Coast called Chester County, Pennsylvania. And so I saw all of these pristine, beautiful wildlands getting bulldozed and converted into suburban lawns and ticky-tack houses. They all look the same. But then I had this conflict because I was like, oh, man, my heart's broken because I love that environment. But then some people that I really loved moved into those houses that were developed there. And so I said, what a weird thing that I can love these people so much, but at the same time feel so sad that they destroyed what I loved. And what I realized is that we didn't have to choose between beautiful nature and lovely people. We could have both. And so I said, well, how do we have both? And that got me to the answer of, oh, it's just a design problem. It's not that, nature is a certain kind of way or that human beings are inherently bad and destructive. It's just we have weird designs where when we follow those designs, there's destruction. But that means that there can be designs that when we implement them, they're constructive instead of destructive. So I got into agriculture and sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture, really studied that in university, did a couple startups around that. And I ended up living in the Dominican Republic, like I mentioned. And I was educating the locals and on different kind of practices that would be a little less destructive, bringing people together. And then for the development company that we were with, their whole position was, how can we have conservation as the design of development, which are often seen at odds. So you can imagine why I ended up with that group. And what dawned on me was that, I've planted a lot of trees, I've improved a lot of soil in my life, but the owner of the land is really, at the end of the day, who gets to decide whether that hard, beautiful work of rehabilitating the environment and harmonizing man with nature, the owner of the real estate is the one who decides whether that's going to continue or not. So then I said, well, I got to be that guy. So then I got into real estate, being that guy, and then saying, but if I have this thing, now I can have it under these design principles. So all that was facilitated in part by a meditative experience that I had when I was living on an organic farm in Costa Rica, where it was just this extraordinary experience of a deep connectedness. And I had been fostering and investigating what was it that I experienced there. So I came across, a lot of Eastern philosophy that talked about compassion, kindness, taking care of others, and at the same time, cultivating stillness of mind and mindfulness that never leaves, including physical practices that help us support that lifestyle of living mindfully and beautifully, which are things like the physical yoga practices and beyond. So then all that came together after COVID started. I was saying, well, what do I want to do next? And so then I said, I just really want to share this idea of compassion because I've educated so many people on carbon, and I'm trying to get people really excited about carbon, but their eyes gloss over. And one thing that's common between all people that I've met that really care about carbon or climate change or taking care of the environment is that they have compassion. So then I realized if you don't have compassion, why would you take care of the environment? If you are compassionate, then an extension of that is taking care of the world that you live in, that you share with others, and the one that will provide for generations to come. So then that's how I got into teaching, studying yoga full time.
So who's been kind of a consistent role model or hero for you?
I've taken on so many role models, Joe. But I would say that one of my primary role models, there's two that ever since I was young, I've just been totally fascinated by these people. It was Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those two individuals, I've studied them extensively. And then as I've gotten into Eastern philosophy, I've learned about the Eastern philosophers that I've really taken on as, minds that I've tried to study, which would include Jetsun Kappa and Shantideva is another one, and Master Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutra. So those are kind of I guess Gandhi's Eastern also, but the Western ones would be more like Martin Luther King Jr., Doctor, as well as Nikola Tesla, and even George Washington. I loved studying about George Washington.
So if you could meet one person alive right now on the planet that you find fascinating, who would that be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
I'm gonna have to share. Someone asked me this the other day, Joe, and I'm gonna have to share an opinion that was a little interesting, which was I'd love to meet Donald Trump. I'd love to meet Donald Trump, and here's why. I love to meet people who have different perspectives than I do, especially people that sometimes I don't agree with necessarily. So not only different, but we have differing opinions. And that's someone who's so influential that I'd really love to know more about the person directly as opposed to a media representation of them, just to have a deeper understanding of the world that I'm participating in. I have a great fortune of spending time frequently with the people that really inspire me a lot. People like Connie O'Brien, Earl Burney, and Geshe Michael Roach. These are people who I really look up to, but I also work with on a daily basis. I think that they're really tremendous, beautiful people. So I feel very fortunate for that. So strangely, maybe if you know me, I would love to meet Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I know that, that's the thing about perception. We don't really know, I think, sometimes who these people are.
Exactly.
So, I can totally get into that. So let me ask you this. What is your motivation every day to wake up to do the work that you do? You got to give a lot of yourself. You have to retain enough to evolve as a human. But what is that for you that allows you to give and to help people and to also evolve as a human?
There's this beautiful meditation. It's called death awareness meditation. And not to get dark here, but I think it's very sobering. I've had a couple near-death experiences that just have totally reshaped my priorities. When you have life almost taken away from you, I think that it just forces you to think about things differently. So there's a classic Buddhist meditation where the first conclusion that we do when we ponder upon life and death is that death is certain. But then the second realization is that the time of death is uncertain. So then the question is, well, then how do we spend our time? Well, we spend our time meaningfully. And then you have to ask the question, well, what does spending time meaningfully mean to you? And for me, what really gets me out of bed every morning with that awareness of, today might be my last day. I have no idea. Well, we're all unsure of when it's going to be our time. But for me, it's about living for the sake of all beings. How can I walk through the world that's going to make the world net more compassionate? So what does that look like? Well, every single day is a little bit different, right? But I think that there's a lot of people who are going through a lot of difficult times, including ourselves. And so I think it's a beautiful way to spend life, of trying to relieve the suffering of all beings on earth, including ourselves. But sometimes we can get so wrapped up in ourselves that we forget that there's other people too who are suffering. So what gets me out of bed is trying to relieve the suffering of all beings as best as I can. And today, all beings might look like the 3 people that I see at the store and my wife. That's all beings for me today. But I'm going to do my best to make the world a better place today, because life's hard.
So of all of the new clients that you've had in this new life of being in yoga, what's one of your favorite client success stories?
Wow, there's so many. But maybe I'll share a general thing that I hear with the students we work with is that they feel like they found their purpose of living. And that's to live for the sake of all beings, kind of what I shared with you right now. I think that if you can receive a beautiful vision and feel confident in the path to accomplish that vision, then it changes the way that it just changes the way that you walk through the world. And, I've been totally blown away and totally humbled by so many, like to the tune of, I'd say, hundreds of students who have provided testimonials that say that they feel like they've really understood that their purpose on earth is to serve others. And not as some foreign idea that's hard to grasp, but as something that you can practically do on a moment-to-moment basis. So, what that looks like for some people is some of my students have had addictions, and they were able to recover through their addiction and then expand out of that. That has been very, very beautiful. I've had people who have been in lines of work that weren't necessarily supportive of a global consciousness or, supportive of something constructive. And so I've seen people change their livelihoods, which have changed their lives, which has changed how they've shown up in their partners' lives, in their families' lives, in their friends' lives, because now they're more integrated in with their soul's inspiration. So just helping people to develop the courage and the clarity to be able to go and take action on that, which could be dramatically different. So those are some of the things that I would share. I have a couple people in mind, but that's kind of a generalization, Joe.
So of all of the things that you've done in your life and accomplished and become and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of that question? What are you the proudest of everything you've done in your life? What are you the proudest of? I would say being a good husband to my wife. I think it's so funny. I think that at the end of the day, I'm just trying to be love, and the person closest to me is my wife. And I know that I'm not perfect, but I'm really, really proud of how I make that relationship a priority. And one of my main reasons to cultivate a good version of me is so that I could give it to the people that I love, because I think that's what they deserve. So trying to be a good son, trying to be a good husband. I think that those pursuits I'm the most proud of.
So, you're in the business of helping people get to a better place, and I'm curious, in your life, what's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Well, there's two that come to mind, Joe. Number one is serve others. It's super simple, but my goodness, if you make it a way of life to serve other people, it's just really gorgeous. You won't, it's really hard to regret serving others. So when in doubt, serve others, and when not in doubt, serve others. But the other one is, well, I'm going to give you three, Joe. The next one is, in all things, pursue peace. And that was given to me by a friend of mine when we were reflecting on what it would be like at the end of our lives, on our deathbeds. What's the last thing we want to feel? And we said, we just want to feel at peace. So then it said, well, why pursue anything else? So to have an understanding of what actually is peace and what produces peace and what jeopardizes peace, I think that takes a lot of nuance, self-awareness, and study and wisdom. But I think that that's a beautiful pursuit. And then I'll give you kind of a silly one that was really important to me when I was a teenager, especially in my early 20s. My dad told me this one. He said, if you're going to be stupid, be smart about it. And
right.
I'm pretty sure that I'm still alive today because of that piece of advice.
That is a great old man advice to give to somebody, because that is so very true. Yeah. It's interesting.
My mom would say, don't be stupid. But my dad understands the reality of, well, if you're going to be stupid, which you are, at least be smart about it. Oh, hey, Joe, you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I had my earbuds got kind of weird. So yeah, no, I'm here. No, that's great. So I'm curious. Everyone out there has a perception of you: family, friends, clients, colleagues. But you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I see myself as somebody who's got a genuine interest in understanding what it means to live a meaningful life. And I think that my perception of myself is that I really genuinely put in the effort to discover what that means for me uniquely and then to put it into practice. I see myself more than anything as a gardener and a farmer, and then next as a musician. And then I see myself as someone who genuinely wants to understand the true practices of yoga as they've been passed on for millennia, And I see myself as somebody who's a ball of energy, and sometimes that's a vice and sometimes that's a virtue.
Yeah, I get that feeling. It's interesting you mentioned that idea of how you want to leave this planet. And when I was 16, my best friend at the time was 17, and he was chronically in and out of the hospital. And I used to have dreams in my 20s with him, and it was like we were hanging out again, and everything was cool. And he was one of those kids that would go inside, and he had an IV drip that he would plug into, but it wasn't a big deal. He was a kid. We were kids. We rolled with it. I thought it was a little, odd, but for him, it was just, it was just another day on this planet. And after he passed, we would have these dreams. And I remember at one point I looked over and I said, what does God feel like? And all of a sudden I was literally on a rope swing, and the ropes just went up into the sky, attached to nothing but sky. And I swung down over a serene pond, and my big toe lightly skimmed the top of the pond, and boom, that was it. He gave me the feeling, and I've never seen him in a dream since. So when I think about that serenity, that level of like touching both of these worlds, it was like he gave me that gift. And it was almost as though there was a pact that if I was going to go there, if I was going to ask about a supreme deity, that there was a chance that, that's my assumption. Maybe that was a rule, one of those Harry Potter wizardry rules, but that was what happened. And it's to this day, it's one of the more magnanimous moments that kind of parted the curtains for me.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's very cool, Joe. So how does that shine through in your daily life, or maybe in moments of stress, or how does that come through into your world today?
I think I built a bridge at that point between a life that I had, when I was younger, I was crazy and just kind of unruly. And then I really got into a phase of Christianity in high school. And then I kind of fell into just running around and kind of trying to figure the world out and traveling. And I think it built a bridge between a level of spirituality that I've always sought in my life and a level of me trying to figure this world out on a secular grounding. And I think between those worlds, I kind of found a level of comfort that, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to speak. It's okay, in that whole vein of Mark Twain, to do it, because to not do it would be a problem. So I think there's levels of that have bridged these parts of my life.
I love that. And I think that there's so many wonderful wisdom traditions or religions or faiths that indicate, I kind of went through a similar thing where, I was really into Christianity, and then I kind of went away from that, and I started looking at lots of different explanations of the world and our experience. And one thing that I thought was just so lovely was that in most every religion that I could find, or whatever system, there was a common denominator of just be nice. There was just a common denominator of try to respect people, and there was a common denominator of love. And I think that's really beautiful. And one of the ways that I've kind of landed on all this is I really believe that the world is a special place. I think that it's very unique and rare and precious to have a life and to have a mind. And there's times when we get glimmers or shimmers of something special, whether it's a really special moment in a sunset or maybe in a dream where it feels like you said, kind of the curtains were parted. And I think that there's all these different paths to get to the place where we can see that as our every single moment experience. That's not something that's only for special occasions or is something far away or separate from ourselves. I think that the world is really magnificent, and it's just a matter of clearing away obstacles in order to see the world in its true form, which I think is this beautiful, sparkling, bridged, I don't know, in another word, divine experience of the world. And I don't necessarily think that requires any kind of religion or faith. I think it's simply just a clearing away of obstructions to see what's actually there already.
Absolutely. Well said. I think this is a perfect way to wrap up this conversation. That was so well said, and especially for us to kind of have our own shared testimonial on being on this planet. So if anyone out there wants to hire you, learn more about what you're doing, reach out. Bob, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I'd encourage them to follow me on Instagram. It's bob.cirino, and that's Cirino on Instagram. I have an online community of people who are interested in living fearlessly on purpose, along with a bunch of educational programs and community interaction at spiritualwarrior.life. And then you can always follow our institute at the yogastudiesinstitute.org if you want to get deep into the different texts and practices of the tradition of yoga. So that'd be really great, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks for your fun questions. They were very stimulating, and I hope that this is of service to your listeners. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. Our esteemed theme music was composed and produced by the great E.E. Pointer of Kansas City's River Cow Orchestra. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.